we're on to our final talk. Fanni and Talia are going to be talking about the state of conservation technology. We are so excited about, I personally, I can't speak for our whole, I think I can speak for our whole team, but I know Talia and I for many, many years have had this vision of turning our annual survey data into a multi-year report and giving you guys access to the data that we're collecting from, that you're helping us collect, so that we can track trends in how our sector is changing. And this report is the first time we've been able to do that, and is hopefully the start of us being able to do it for many years to come. So we're really excited to share these results, but I will hand over to Fanni and Talia to talk through what they are. Take it away, guys.
Thank you, Steph. Fanni and I are very excited to share this info with you. So some of you, as Steph mentioned, may have seen that we just released our latest State of Conservation Tech report. This one is very special because it's the first time that we've been able to look at trends in the data over time, with 3 years on the State of Conservation Technology questions. So I'm going to hand it over in a minute to Fanni, who interned with us at Wild Labs, hosted by our partner organization WWF over the summer. And she did an amazing job doing all the analyses, building the report. So massive credit to her. But just to give you just a little bit of context before I do that. So Wild Labs, we've been serving our Wild Labs community for, I think, since 2016, Steph, is that right? Since very early on in our community history.
Well, given we launched in November 2015, yes, 2016.
Yes, since 2016. So since our launch, we've been really prioritizing and wanting to understand how all of you are experiencing Wild Labs, what's working for you, what's not, what you're thinking about and working on, and how we can better support. So initially, this research was really just an internal community survey to understand those things. In 2020, that we ended up publishing in 2021, we evolved this into a more formal survey tool where we could reach not only the Wild Labs community, but also folks engaging with monitoring and conservation technologies all over the world. And we did that through our partners at Colorado State University. And then this year, as I mentioned, for the first time, we've been able to look at 3 years of that data, where we're actually asking questions not just about Wild Labs, but about the broader sector and how things are evolving over time, and measuring like usage in technology engagement and opportunities and challenges across the sector. So we're very excited to do that. I also just wanted to flag that we did separate out, some of you may have noticed if you've gone into this year's survey, that the Wild Labs questions are no longer in there. So now Wild Labs is going to have our own separate community survey that you can look out for later. And then just a final note in terms of context, that we have gotten so much positive feedback about how useful these reports are from our community since this initial research came out in 2021. And we've already seen a lot of evidence of the results being used for basically to support the community's work, from big NSF and private sector funding proposals to small student grants and projects. And the only way that we can continue to do this research is by all of you taking your time and sharing your thoughts on the survey. So we will drop in the link to this year's survey that's open now as well. But just a huge thank you to all of you for making this possible. And yeah, to flag that we would love to hear from you again on this year's survey as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Fanni to talk through this year's results.
Thank you, Talia. Sorry, I had to look for the floating thingy to stuff. So before getting into the results themselves, I wanted to very briefly go over who did we hear from across the years. So we received over 600 responses that could be analyzed over the last 3 years. And we see kind of an even split across the years. And we also see that usually more than half of the people who fill out the survey are Wild Labs members. This was not the case in 2022, but we can see that the community is quite engaged over the years. When we looked at the gender balance, we could also see that it has been mostly stable across the year, not many changes. But where we did see some changes, and it was quite exciting to see, is the geographical coverage has been expanded over the years. So on this map, you can see with a light blue the countries that first appeared in 2020 in the survey, and with the darker shades, countries that popped up in 2021 or 2022. And this clearly shows that our respondents have been changing over the years, and overall the survey covers more countries or more varied countries in 2022 than it did in 2020. Kind of staying with this message, we also looked at just like the number of countries per region or per continent, and we can kind of see that it's a more balanced split in 2022 than it was in 2020. Europe and North America is still highly represented, but the share of other regions or continents have been increasing, which is great to see, because it's a more varied voice that we can talk about. And finally, we also looked at the organization of the respondents, and we can see that most people who fill in the survey are either from tech companies, universities or research institutes, or conservation NGOs. And we have a relatively even split between these three. And we've also seen a couple of people fill it in who are from other areas. Most notably, government agencies seems to have been increasing over the years. So with that in mind, I wanted to share the top findings with you. First of all, we asked people about what technologies they are using, and we are monitoring the shifts across the years. And kind of high-level takeaways that we haven't really seen major shifts. Camera traps, GIS, and remote sensing are the two most popular technologies people are utilizing. But we've also seen a couple of tools where we see that they are being used more and their popularity is increasing. Most notably, AI tools and data management and processing platforms are two areas where we've seen a higher share of respondents indicating that they are using these technologies, and also a little bit about biologgers and network sensors. We've seen the same. We also wanted to understand where people see technologies currently performing well, but also what technologies have a high potential in the future. And GIS and remote sensing, which was also one of the most frequently used technologies, came on top of the current performance list in both 2020 and 2022. But we wanted to focus on where people see impact for the future. And AI tools, eDNA and genomics, and network sensors were three areas where people both identified that current performance might not be what they want it to be, but they see and they feel that the potential impact in the future could be huge. Interestingly, this is a little bit different in 2022 than it was in 2020. AI tools and network sensors are still perceived as potentially highly impactful in the future, but eDNA and genomics drop back from the second place to the 10th place. This might just be 2022 not being a good year for these technologies, but this might be explained by it being a hype technology, and kind of this technology hype cycle shifted over. And while in 2020 it seemed like this was a promising technology, by 2022 it seemed like maybe not as much as some people anticipated it. Interestingly, biologgers replaced it in the top three, even though its current performance is already rated relatively well. So beyond technologies people are working with, we also wanted to understand what are the sector-wide challenges people are facing on a day-to-day basis. And when looking at any of the last 3 years, funding competition came back by far the most serious challenge people identified, next to matching technology to conservation and application of efforts. But the rate, how much more funding competition is identified as an issue, it's been increasing. So it seems like it's even more of an issue compared to other challenges than the number 2 and number 3 in 2022 at least. We also wanted to understand what were the challenges within conservation issues that people mostly focused on, and we found that this hasn't been changing. The number 1 is biodiversity monitoring, followed by species protection and protected area management and planning. Zooming in on some specific user groups, we were really interested in seeing what constraints them, what they are struggling with. we also asked end users of conservation technology, what are the main constraints that they are facing? And this is a snapshot of 2022, where we saw that upfront costs were the number one issue and accessing local suppliers were number two. Upfront cost actually has been number one in each year. It seems like this is a prevalent issue that people are facing over time, but accessing local suppliers is something that hasn't been a prominent constraint in 2020 or 2021. So it seems like this constraint and also time required to engage has been more on people's minds in 2022 than before. On the other hand, technical skills seems to be less of a constraint because it used to be number two and now it's only number five when people had to rank these constraints. We also wanted to understand what developers were thinking and what were they constrained by. And again, here's a snapshot of 2022, but here we've seen less changes than for end users. So for number one and number two, we've seen continued funding and seed funding come back as the top constraints in each year. And engineering challenges and lack of standards have been recurrent in the top five each year. Supply chain issues is something relatively new. And the thing that it replaced is understanding the landscape, which actually used to be the second most pressing constraint in 2020, but now it's not even in the top five. We also wanted to zoom in and see if there were any groups or group of people who were more likely to struggle with some of these constraints. And we found that for end users, being in a developing country led to being more likely to struggle with a couple of these constraints, most notably maintenance costs, accessing training, mentoring, and advice, accessing local tech suppliers, and upfront costs were some areas where we've seen a statistically significant relationship between being in a developing country and identifying these as constraints. When we looked at developers, in addition to location, which also came up as a significant differentiator, but we've seen that women were more likely to struggle with a couple of areas as well, most notably accessing relevant data, overcoming user concerns about data security, securing continued funding, and testing and accessing testing sites were all areas where female respondents indicated that it seemed like they were just more likely to struggle with these constraints than others. And finally, we also wanted to understand whether Wild Labs had a measurable impact on participants' opinions. And we found that active Wild Labs members were actually 1.5 times less likely to struggle with some of these conservation tech challenges, including accessing relevant training, accessing mentoring and advice, and matching technological expertise to conservation challenges, which is probably not surprising, but I guess it's still nice to hear. Finally, to kind of close up on a positive note, we also ask people if they are becoming more optimistic, and we've seen that over the years, people have become more optimistic about the state of the conservation field, which was great to hear. And we also wanted to see what were the best ways to optimize technology for conservation and what are the areas people are optimistic about or interested in. And we found that collaboration and information sharing was the number one, followed by accessible user-friendly tools and the interoperability of tools and data. So these were the results. I hope you found them interesting. And just echoing Talia in hopefully, if you can take a few minutes, we would love to hear your opinion and we would love to see what you think in the 2023 State of Conservation Tech Survey. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thanks, guys. How have we finished 5 minutes early? I don't quite understand. I thought we were going to have like heaps of time. Anyway, sorry, I've gotten distracted by the time. Talia and Fanni, I would love to know. Great presentation. Well done on all of the work that has gone into that. I'd love to know from you guys, what was the thing that most surprised you, or the key takeaway for you?
Fanni, do you want to go first?
I can. Honestly, like one thing that was really surprising to me, like I didn't know a lot about the specific technology, so I already learned a lot about just like, oh, what is a camera trap, because I didn't know that before the summer. But the most surprising learning for me was that people are actually becoming more optimistic, and most people are optimistic because if you're not engaged with the field, I think it's very easy to become cynical and just say like, oh, we are all gonna die, all the animals are gonna die. We're just like heading towards doom. And it's just nice to see that the people who are actually active in this field are actually becoming more optimistic, because it just, makes me more optimistic as well.
Yeah, I would say for me, it's kind of similar to how I feel every year when I read through the results of the survey, which is actually, it's not that many of the specific challenges and constraints and ideas are particularly surprising, although it's really interesting to get to see changes in trends over time, like seeing how the hype cycle is affecting how folks are using eDNA, for example, now, or the potential they see in it. But it's actually just how much they reflect trends and that everyone is experiencing and articulating such similar things. And I think we saw that in the WildLabs survey before it evolved into State of Conservation Tech. And we see it now as well, especially looking over time. So I think it's great to be able to have a bigger and like broader scope to look at how things are shifting. But mostly, I think a lot of the purpose of this work isn't necessarily to identify really surprising things. It's to capture what we all know and put data behind it and support our community to use that to advance the field and to support their continued work.
Nice. Hey, Ram, do you have a mic? Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I do have one.
Do you want to jump? That's an interesting question. Do you want to throw it in?
Yeah, so I don't have first-hand experience, but I believe the LLMs and the AI models have a very huge carbon footprint, starting from the fact that a generative AI prompt is 6 times that of a Google search. So it'll be only a matter of time before there's some sort of tax for using this. Because the challenge is I might be sitting in a country and the Google farm might be in some other country where the actual footprint happens, right? So, and I think we need to be a little more sustainable on this front and not just go expanding all out just because these models are available. And I think it would be great if Wild Labs could do a little more research and put that out as well alongside the fact, because they are contributing to so much of technology initiatives.
So I guess the question is, how do you guys see like either this piece of research evolving, or do you think there's scope for the research that we're doing with the community to evolve to pick up some of these?
Yeah, I think the information going out is important, because like a simple thing is like people here don't like if I take the analogy of manufacturing jeans, a pair of jeans takes about 200 gallons of water. People don't realize it. And so when you say use technology, I think it's also important to provide the information that, hey, use it sustainably.
I think so. We agree. But let me throw it to Talia and Fanni. What do you guys think about our role in capturing that sort of info?
I think this is a conversation we've started to have with like crypto mining and stuff that we've had on previous Variety Hour talks. And it sounds like there are evolutions that make folks in our community. I mean, we're not the experts on this by any means. So I think there are other folks we should ask about it as well. But it sounded like people in the community thought we're moving towards more sustainable options at least for crypto mining and maybe just big data processing. But I think in general, there is a lot of scope to expand on this research. There are so many things that we want to ask every year. We did start doing a bit of like financial market assessment a couple of years ago, but it's just in order to keep the scope of it within reason, I think there may need to just be complementary research efforts. And one idea that we're really excited about is potentially developing this into more of a tool that other folks could also use to survey different aspects of the community and different demographics, and have it be something that could be more widely spread than our small team can just handle capacity-wise at this time. So if anyone's interested to adopt the survey or work with us to figure out other areas of exploration, please let us know. We would love to explore that.
Tarun, do you want to jump in and ask your question? Oh, do you have a mic?
I do. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
All right. No, I just wanted to understand, like, if there is an analysis, or if you guys are thinking in terms of, like, I know the computing cost for AI it grows exponentially once your use case is more scalable, but there might be areas where some of the use cases of AI may be mapped to some of the cost savings. I know funding is a big problem, but thinking of it in another direction of how to cut down costs with some of the work, has there been any analysis or thought around that aspect?
By work, do you mean like conservation projects?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of the reason why AI comes out on the top of the list of high potential technologies, because I think it already is having a massive influence on the efficiency of conservation projects. The thing, and Wild Labs is also, we're engaged with some projects that are working to kind of increase the accessibility of that space and build more training tools and capacity building programs that will make those tools more widely applicable. But I think what we hear is that it has incredible potential for increasing efficiency and cost savings, but that right now it's just not accessible to the vast majority of the applied conservation world. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to not only develop the tools and make them more effective, but also to make them usable by conservation end users.
That makes sense. And then just as a in the continuum, from the field, how it's, I know there are mechanisms to capture the data. As long as the data is collected through an automated mechanism like a camera trap or something, then there's low chances of having, for example, manual data errors, but more if it's being logged, and which is happening in a lot of developing countries or areas where it's still being manually entered into the files and getting into the spreadsheets and getting the so there's a lot of processing that is happening. So I was thinking about, like, have you looked at it from that lens, like how much of it's manual at this point, where some of these challenges are being already addressed in conservation work, at more developed or more old conservation work that is happening since time. So
yeah, I think if I understand your question, I think a lot of the tools that are making the biggest difference in terms of like digitizing on the ground conservation data, those are like the protected area management software tools like Earth Ranger and Smart and things like that that we see even in our women in conservation technology program. We kind of cover the whole gambit of tools available, and the ones that folks are those are early career Kenyan and Tanzanian women, that the tools that they tend to be the most interested in and can then go directly back to their own conservancies or workplaces and adopt are those tools that help switch a team from maybe like collecting data on a piece of paper to then using these tools that can help kind of digitize the process and reduce errors there and stuff. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, in that direction too, because there are some technologies, that are, there are some small programs that have been set up using technology and using AI, where you are paying local economies and local communities to, collect that data and make, it's an economic model, and that's really scaling. So that's why I was just curious and thinking how you're thinking that direction. So nope, that helps. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to wrap us up there and say thank you to all of our fantastic speakers today. And just say that if you guys want to hang out, we'll do after hours and stop the recording. But for everyone on the recording and everyone who has to log off now, thank you so much for joining us today and for the whole year as well. This is going to be our last variety hour for the year. We'll see you back here again next year, and possibly we may have some other events before the end of the year, but it'll be our last variety hour. So a big thank you to all our speakers today, all our speakers this year, and for all of you joining and like just being the most wonderful community to be a part of. And we hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you here fresh and bright next year. Bye, everyone.